Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And welcome, whether you are red tagged, blue tagged, or not tagged at all, whether you are newly part of our community, considering becoming part of our community, whether you have been here for 5 months or 5 generations, whatever your tenure or track record, by being here tonight, you participate in an act of imagination. Actually, tonight's service invites you to multiple acts of imagination. If you think about it, when we lit Shabbat candles, you were invited to consider those lights as the first light of creation. When we sang Lecha Dodi, you were invited to turn towards the door and imagine a Sabbath bride entering the room. When we sang Mi Chamocha, you were invited to imagine yourself as a slave first tasting freedom in the Exodus from Egypt. You have been imagining already, let alone, by the way, imagining God. Imagining a source of holiness and oneness in the world that you can neither see nor touch. But especially important for tonight is that imagination is not only a foundation of faith and of spirituality, it is in fact the basis for community. The very community that many of you join in this new year. The great American writer Marilyn Robinson puts it this way: community consists of imaginative love for people we do not know or whom we know very slightly. Look around this room. Many of you will declare yourselves to be part of this community with others in this room whom you have never met, or whom you have met and know are quite different than you. To join this community is to say, I belong to a group of people whose backgrounds, childhoods, challenges, sources of fulfillment may in fact be different than mine. But because we share common vision, common commitments, common possibilities, a common core, I am willing in this room and beyond this room, in this community of diverse people, to say, they are mine and I am theirs. That's the difference between a community and a tribe. A tribe is kind of like a mirror. It's a group of people to whom I belong because they are as much like me as possible. Because I see in each one a reflection of myself, my family, my gene pool, my bloodline. Almost universal overlap of self-interest. That is my tribe. That is not my or this community. I learned something this week that I had never known before. The word heterogeneous is actually a geological term. Heterogeneous rock is rock that is less stable because it consists of multiple varieties, now I'm betraying my geological ignorance, of rock. Homogeneous rock consists exclusively or by far predominantly of one kind of rock. The problem is that we sometimes carry the analogy forward. And we might suspect that heterogeneous community is somehow not as strong as homogeneous community, when I think precisely the opposite is true. Why? Because heterogeneous community requires imagination. It requires and cultivates the capacity to say, I have profound dimensions of my being in common with someone who is not the mirror tribal image of who I am. That challenge to cultivation of the capacity for imagination is what makes a heterogeneous community, I would argue, stronger than one that consists of only one kind of human rock. Now, it's possible that this is troubling to you. It's possible that to take something like faith and tradition and communal solidarity and think of them in terms of imagination feels a little too fuzzy, a little too cotton candy. It feels like the foundations have become ephemeral or gauzy. So, I'll give you another version of the same idea in case imagination is unsettling. And the next version of the same idea is that we have a word for what it means to imagine your commonality with someone who doesn't present themselves as being exactly like you. We have a word for what it means to imagine yourself into someone else's shoes, into someone else's story, into someone else's troubles, into someone else's life. And the word we have for that imagining is empathy. Empathy is my capacity to imagine myself into your story. And my capacity to imagine your story into mine. And what makes community, which I would argue is actually by definition heterogeneous, what makes community such a beautiful, sacred, powerful thing is that it's the place where we practice empathy. It's the place where the bonds of connection are sufficiently strong that we can tolerate the differences. This chapel should not be the place where you come to sit in a row with people who are exactly like you. It should be the place where you come to sit in a row with people whose stories will enrich your own, whose challenges will shed light on your own, whose laughter can lift up your day. Not a place of tribal mirrors. And when we practice empathy here, within these walls, it has an even greater goal. And that is we practice it here, practice both in the sense of spiritual practice and do it a lot so we get good at it. We practice empathy here so that we can build that skill and build that muscle and then take it into the wider world. A wider world which God and all of us know needs a whole lot more empathy and a whole lot less tribal thinking. Someone who is self-evidently different from me, whose story is self-evidently different from mine. The imaginative capacity for empathy means that I can assimilate those differences into my experience and my understanding. So lest you think that the work of imagination is sort of gauzy unicorn stuff, it's hard work. It means showing up in the face of someone else's pain. It means showing up in the face of someone else's story that you might not want to hear. We practice it in here because we've got enough commonality that the differences aren't so jarring. But when we build the skill and the muscle, we take it out into the world where the differences are jarring. But we've learned here to say, let me listen and let me see how this experience can enter my own. That may be true about the plight of people of different races than ours, different socioeconomic challenges than ours, different health challenges than ours. But it is the capacity that we build with sacred imagining. If we only practice tribalism, if I seek out only the relationships that are mirrors, then what happens is what we see happening out there. I become helpless and frustrated in the face of otherness. And that's why the geological analogy is precisely wrong. That what we are learning in our day and age is that tribal mirror homogeneity creates not greater strength, but brittleness. And things break. And that's why the practice of community, the practice of imagining, the practice of empathy is so vital. It's not just true in sort of big numbers in a big room and big society out there. It's true at our kitchen tables. What does it mean when someone, to use my sister-in-law's favorite expression, is acting like a total pill? What does it mean when someone is acting like a total pill, and in that moment, for me to imagine beyond the not nice things they're saying? For me to imagine my way into the source of their frustration. Then I might need a mirror. To imagine my way into their pain and their struggle. It's not just at protests and who's holding up what sign and who's made which statements. It's in the car, it's at the kitchen table, it's in the bedroom discussion. Can I imagine my way into this person's truth in addition to what is being presented to me in this moment? So that's what we, when we're at our best, and we are not always at our best, that is what we try to do at Temple Emanu-El. We try to cultivate religious imagination, to try to help people, ourselves and all of us, discern meaning beyond what's staring me in the face, to imagine Sabbath bride, to imagine light of creation, to imagine excitement of redemption, to imagine the God beyond imagining as being as close and intimate as my own breath. To practice in this place so that we can bring beyond this place. And the empathy that we practice here, our ultimate goal may be a source of understanding and togetherness. But when we practice it out there, our ultimate goal is a world of compassion and justice. So I'm going to give you one quick example from this week's Torah portion. From Deuteronomy 10, chapter 17. This may be where this whole empathy thing comes from. For the Lord your God is God supreme and Lord supreme, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who shows no favor and takes no bribe, but upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and befriends the stranger, providing the stranger with food and clothing. You too must befriend the stranger, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. God, in those verses, is the paragon of empathy. The God who is God supreme, I'm not making this up, God supreme, Lord supreme, great, mighty, and awesome. That God imagines God's way into the life of the powerless, the fatherless, the widow, the stranger. God imagines God's way into the plight of people whose powerlessness is the diametric opposite of God's power. And as soon as God does that, what does God say to us? We should befriend the stranger because we were strangers. So by the way, the God of imagining empathy says you should be people of imagining empathy too. We are created in the image of an imagining God. To imagine the plight of another when it is not our own. To imagine justice when justice seems out of reach. To imagine compassion when compassion seems impractical. To imagine another person's pain when all we're experiencing is their power. To imagine another person's dignity when all that is visible to us is their distress. Within these walls and beyond them, that is what we try to practice. What Marilyn Robinson calls imaginative love. So welcome to a congregation that is, when we are at our best, a community of imaginative love. Welcome to a place where we believe that we are created in the image of an imagining God, where we imagine and work our way, we pray, in this new year to wholeness in our hearts, to a world of justice and of peace. Shabbat Shalom.